All right.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Shall we dive right in?
You bet.
Let's start, though, with maybe a little bit of backstory. You were how old when you started this company?
I was 15 years old and about 5 hours north of here in Humboldt County, where Rad was started.
Were e-bikes even a thing back then?
No, I think like many of the folks here today, we've been in the industry for a long time. This is 17 years for me, and back then it was hobbling together parts from old motors, electric scooters, and just making something work. So now things have come a long ways in 17 years or so.
And a few years later, you decided to build a bike from scratch and to crowdfund that effort?
Yeah, so Rad, as you know it today, as the direct-to-consumer pioneer, started in 2015. So I started the company in 2007, was when it was founded and named, and it was a sole proprietorship. And in 2015, we launched off as the pioneer for direct-to-consumer e-bikes. And we did that with the Rad Rover initially, which was our flagship product, and pioneered fat tires and throttles and 750 watts of power and front and rear racking systems. And that was the kind of the kickoff of the modern day Rad.
So fast forward to the present day, you've obviously done a good job of getting to a sweet spot of features people want at an accessible price. I think anybody who e-bikes around a city and pays attention to the other e-bikes on the road will notice a very high percentage of them are yours. But are there things other than that sweet spot that make a Rad? And we happen to have one of your bikes right here, if you'd like to use that as an example.
Yeah, something Harry commented in a review of a Rad Power bike during the pandemic was the upright handlebar position. And that's just one of the design considerations that we feel like we brought to this category. So when I started building e-bikes, it was not with any foundation in bike design or anything of the like. It was just listening to customers, what the customer wanted. And they wanted higher handlebars. They wanted more powerful e-bikes. They wanted to carry a lot of gear on their bikes with them. They wanted it easier to get on and off the bike rather than such a high top tube. And so you can see here this super low step-through height. And so these are all things that were foundational early in the business. So I think what really lent our success of Rad in the North American market and then opening our European branch 4 years ago is exactly that, accessible, both price and in design. E-bikes that are designed to truly replace car trips. And today, more than 2/3 of our customers' primary reason for riding Rad is to replace car miles. So we're not a fitness brand, or as I call it, an assisted exercise device company. Definitely micromobility.
And these aren't all people who identify as bicycling enthusiasts.
Very similarly, we've seen, let's take a sub-segment of our customers. In the early days, 15 to 20% of our customers were women. That was last time we surveyed, that was 29% and growing very quickly. And so that's not typically seen in the bike category. And I think you'd say the same thing about our customers. They're not cyclists. There's a lot of cyclists that already have a bike problem, and they have 10 bikes in their garage, and they add a Rad to it. But their Rad is not to replace their bikes. Their Rad is to replace their car trips.
You sell direct, which is certainly not traditionally how bicycles were sold. Is that core to how you do what you do beyond helping on the price point front?
Yeah, we always just had this direct connection with our customers. And so it's why we built bikes that don't, some of our bike designs have been controversial, and it's because we went straight to the consumer all along in our journey. So the innovations we have coming are also driven by that customer insight as a direct-to-consumer brand. And it produces a lot of flywheel effects for the business too, and for the end user. And so one of those things is that you can now come into company-owned Rad retail stores, or you can work with our team online, and we think that's pretty unique. And we see the traditional bike industry starting to take some cues from that. And that also, just to be totally transparent, I think that's creating a lot of channel conflict for the traditional brands that are fighting between their dealer networks and their direct model. And what Rad does instead is we used bicycle dealerships, third-party mobile service providers. We integrate them into the platform as white glove service and delivery providers. So even though our model is direct to consumer, we do place a lot of value and investment in those third-party relationships, and we'll continue to do so.
Does that help you get over the hump that a lot of people do not really understand e-bikes until they've been on one and that would like to try it out, and then the moment you do that, you get it?
Yeah, a lot of the conversations I've been having today have included the transformation that's happening with the consumer right now, like what's changing with the e-bike customer. And the types of questions that we get are a lot different than they used to be. Where maybe in the early days, early adopters would know every nut and bolt of the bike. They'd understand amps versus, they understand the bike inherently. And now the customer needs a lot more of the initial education. How do you use your bell when passing on a bike trail? How to inflate tires? What do how do you, people are always amazed that you can carry, we have pet carriers, so you can carry your pets with you on the bike. And that's the next stage for the e-bike revolution is educating the masses and getting some sort of a tipping point that we're not even close to hitting yet to happen. And as you shared, as we came up onto the stage, e-bikes are already outselling electric cars. And so I just don't think we've seen anything yet.
You have, as you've grown, you've raised quite a bit of money in a manner that people tend to associate with Silicon Valley tech companies. Tell us about how much you've raised and how that is helping your cause.
Yeah, Rad's raised over $300 million, but we've ran a pretty capital efficient business all along too. And people have always been surprised, how do we sell a bike for $1,500 to $2,000 and run a business where the unit economics work? And I think it just has to do with that direct connection to the customer. And normally there's just a lot of layers between the consumer and the point of manufacturing design. And so we have eliminated those. So yeah, that's where we're at.
I saw that on your website you're celebrating having sold 500,000 bikes, and you have an $899 model, at least on sale. So prices have come down, but there are an awful lot of people who could really benefit from an e-bike who for even $899 is out of their budget. Do you expect over time that it'll be possible to make respectable e-bikes at lower prices and bring them to more people?
Certainly. I think there's two categories of customers that are really coming to the revolution right now. And one is that entry price. So the Rad Mission's currently $899, which is a phenomenal bike at that price. And then there's also the customer that wants to do a lot of personalization to their bike, and they really want to dial it in for their life. Like this is the bike I rode over today. This is my kind of normal setup. And so there's, I think, these two groups: the group that just wants a really functional, capable bike at a very low price because they're maybe new to the category and just integrating an e-bike into their life. And then there's this other segment that's really wants to invest in this as a true vehicle for day-to-day use. And so we see both customers and trying to really care for both customers. So that's why all of our bikes have universal front and rear rack accessory mounting systems. So a customer can also enter the brand at a very low entry price and then accessorize it as they go. And I rode over with a customer today who we ran into on the trail, and they had gone from having a caboose system around their kids, and as the kids got older, they went to the handlebar system, and so the bike can evolve just like that.
Any other features on this bike you'd like to call out? And this is your flagship, is that accurate?
The flagship's the Rad Rover, which is our fat tire bike. Okay, but yeah, this is the Rad Runner Plus, and something really special here, one of the patented parts of this bike is this adjustable seat. So the seat can move from a pedaling position, and you can then drop it down into this moped position for a passenger. And what's that might be like, oh yeah, that's great and all, but what really matters there is when you drop the seat down, the passenger can then see over the driver's shoulder, and then it becomes a true Vespa or moped-like experience, and you're both enjoying the ride, and that's something that's really unique to that product. And we've just continued to iterate on it. So now this new handlebar system, and so we're going all in. We love this platform. It's part of our intellectual property in the business, and it's become a super popular bike. Actually, you see a lot of them out in the world. So really proud of it. And you are doing a lot of your own design work rather than just assembling parts in the way that bikes are often just assembled from parts? Yeah, we the last 2 years, this is probably common across a lot of the companies here, we started investing in a lot of stuff in-house. So we built out a really sizable product development organization. And with the change in the economy over the last 6 to 9 months, we've had to shrunk that team, which is something I take a lot of responsibility for. But we're now outsourcing more to our suppliers. So we've built these really robust supplier relationships, so we still have a large internal R&D team that handles all the R&D, all the validation engineering. It tackles all of the industrial design, product road mapping, but some of the iteration of the product is now happening with our suppliers across Southeast Asia and Taiwan, and a factory in Europe. And this is all about taking some of the variable costs that we baked into the business out of the business, because now it's not about just massive growth into the right, it's about running a capital efficient business. And so that's a big pivot we've made in the last 9 months.
Speaking of the state of the world, let's talk about the pandemic e-bike boom. An awful lot of us, including me, got interested in e-bikes at the start of the pandemic, and it was fantastic for sales and also a challenge from a supply chain standpoint. Is the boom continuing over? Is it evolving? Might there be another boom at some point? Or,
Yeah, well, this year we saw fuel prices create a huge surge in demand. And that's seen across, it's very visible, and we hear it directly from our customers that come into our stores. So when fuel prices started to ramp, we saw 30+% of our customers coming into our stores citing high fuel prices as a primary reason for coming in to buy that day. And so that's one big trend. But I would just say that there's always something around the corner to create that next surge. And today we're seeing a huge uptick in incentives. The local government level, at the state government level, we went from 0 at the state level incentives to 4 now active, including the program in Denver, which I know is going to be talked about a lot because it's such a successful proof point at the show today. And we forecast at least a dozen within the next 12 months being active. And these programs are just phenomenal. So I'll explain. The Denver program, as an example, 50% of the people using the incentive are income qualified, which I think is just really compelling about our mission about e-bike accessibility. And half of the bikes being bought are also cargo bikes, which just tells you, that customer really indexes more heavily to eliminating vehicle miles traveled, which is something we're so excited about. And if that happens, we couldn't get it done at the federal level this year as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the e-bike tax credit there. But if this keeps happening in a local and regional level, I mean, I think this is, it creates the next boom. So I wouldn't think about the e-bike being a pandemic boomed category. Right? For 7 years, we've been growing crazy, and that's through the Section 301 tariffs, through dumping duties in Europe, through this global pandemic, now through a fuel crisis. It's just a really resilient form of transportation.
Is some sort of federal incentive dead, or do you think it might come back at some point?
We just got an update. So we invested in a government affairs team within Rad about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And so we got our pulse on it and got some bad news yesterday, and it doesn't look like it's going to come through in the kind of late year packages. So I do think it's dead for now, but we're still working hard on it.
Speaking of government affairs, you're having a significant impact on the world just by selling a lot of e-bikes, but does a company like Rad need to go beyond that in terms of engaging with governments and explaining why making cities more bike-friendly is so important and so beneficial to everybody? And do you talk to cities? Or do you try to encourage legislation? It's
a great question. And we've done a lot the last few years, but I'd say if you go back in time in Rad's history, there's no better time right now where focus is more important in a business, especially in a downturning economy like this. But if you go back in time, it's always been focused, and just pure direct to consumer as a business was the project out of the gate. So we never had a real heavy focus or emphasis on government affairs, but we focused on overcoming the gaps in infrastructure with vehicle design in the early days. So a lot of people asked us why the fat tires on the Rad Rover. It was very controversial, and it got a lot of flack from the traditional industry of these huge tires on our bikes, but it was to overcome rough roads and train tracks, or our bikes having throttles or being more powerful than the traditional 250-watt e-bikes imported from Europe into here. It's the same thing. You can keep up with traffic better. You feel more comfortable in a car-dominated society. So that got us to a certain point of adoption, but now infrastructure is crucial, and education is crucial. And I'd say, I just spent time in a city where Berkeley, where there's a lot of cars and there's good bike infrastructure, but even on the roads where there's bad bike infrastructure, the cars respect cyclists in Berkeley because bikes are treated as a road user. And a lot of the rest of the US, that's not true. So I believe there's pockets where you're going to see adoption just continue to rapidly expand, but there's going to be a large part of the population. It's going to take time with the infrastructure investments and the investments into education. And I think the education mostly needs to happen with drivers of automobiles. But we're taking it very seriously, the education for consumers. So we're soon to be rolling out a new consumer training program, and we already feel like we're best in class within our retail operations for test rides.
Are there cities that are doing it right and are models for everybody else?
I would just look at this last year. I mean, it's been such a hard year on the world, but the investments into infrastructure, take Paris as an example. The sales of certain Rad models in that market have just been amazing, and it's because of direct government, decision making, some bold decision making to prioritize, pedestrians and micromobility users. So that's so exciting, and that's going to happen at an accelerated rate. And one thing more, if I could add, maybe out of the millions of e-bikes that were sold in the last few years, a lot of those buyers were people that work in local, state, federal. Government, and those are decision makers, and that's having an impact. So I think that's maybe underneath it all, maybe one of the most exciting trends developing.
One of the great things about e-bikes is how vibrant the competition is. You've done a great job of competing with much larger, well-established bike companies, but there are also small companies like some of the ones here who are rising up and doing some interesting things. What's the competitive space like, say, compared to a few years ago when you first really saw interest in e-bikes ramp up?
Yeah. I really admire everybody that's here. This is a really passionate group of folks. Like, we do not get the credit we deserve in broader capital markets for this business. So I just think that, like, Rad raising more than $300 million and some of the amazing institutional capital partners that are in this room today and are starting to get behind the movement just tells you a lot that there's something much bigger here brewing. So that's exciting. So I hope that many of our peers continue to progress and persevere through this downturned economy. But I do think there's going to be rapid consolidation. And we have a lot of data points on what that is, both brands contacting us that are maybe considering exiting the market, or contacting various partners of ours and mentioning something similar. So this will be a year of turmoil in the category. And I'd say Rad's not immune to this, so we've been taking it really seriously, and we've spent the last 9 months getting much more focused as a business. So we've unfortunately had to eliminate certain programs, certain aspects of the business that we remain really passionate and long term, but we've had to put to the side for today.
If there is a continuum from the era when the only people interested in e-bikes were geeks like teenage you, to the era that's not yet here, where they are utterly mainstream and on the roads by the million, and they really have moved the needle of helping us to get past the automobile era in a way that has not quite happened yet. Like where are we on that? Are we still near the start, or halfway point, 75% of the way?
It's a really fun question. Yeah, it's a really fun question. So we were talking about this backstage and comparing it to the PC industry and people comparing how many megahertz their computer had, and I think we're still there. We're nowhere near the tipping point or the point where things really take off. I think this is the moment where, with smartphones, some people started getting internet on their phones and it was working well, but most people were doubters and weren't going to give up their BlackBerry. There's no way they were going to get that ripped out of their hands. And so what's the timeline? I think the next 3 to 5 years we'll reach it. It's not going to be over the next 2 years. Like, the next 2 years will be, I think they'll be tumultuous. There's going to continue to be a lot of good growth in the category. And but you're going to need to be really focused as organizations and partners at large in the category. And then 3 to 5 years from now, I think that's when you're going to start to see the acceleration really start to bear down and have an impact. And then the whole problems, all the set of problems all change then. And then it becomes a lot more about how to integrate e-bikes into the broader ecosystem. And I think we're going to start to see big auto and big oil start to pay a lot more attention to the category too. I just think we're still being heavily discounted about how big of an impact that's going to have. We replace more than 150 million miles a year in vehicle miles traveled with our current customer base, and that's growing fast. So excited about those changes, but I'm nervous about the powers that be starting to bear down on the criticality of e-bike scaling. We need e-bikes that get 1,600 plus miles per gallon energy equivalent. Electric cars are not going to save us. So I hope we get a little bit of tailwind here, which will be some of the first in this category.
Great. Well, it will be fun to watch and exciting, and maybe we can talk about it again sometime at a future conference. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Harry.